I remember, my memory of it is, yes, we got free tickets, but that I went, certainly, a little bit sneeringly. This was in 1986. It's an interesting thing in itself, because E.T. came out in 1982. So this was a time when they still kept on very successful films in the cinema. It was a matinee.
Yeah.
They would carry on playing them whenever there were slots for years, really.
Yeah.
And I remember, because my favourite film at the time, when I was 21, was probably The Draftsman's Contract. I was that much of a... And that is basically what I remember. Is that I like art house films. I remember The Passion of Maria Braun and stuff like that. And I just wanted to see films that made me feel like an intellectual. And so I went, I remember thinking, well, this will be something I can sneer at. And then about 2 hours later, I was emotionally devastated. I was absolutely, I'd never had an experience like it. It changed my whole idea of what cinema could do emotionally, and in a way what it should do, because what I think I took away from it was I lost forever that sense that art, and particularly cinema, which is the most involving, I think, of some level of all the arts, should be something from which you stand at one remove and think about coolly and intellectually, and that emotional manipulation in the cinema through storytelling is something to be abhorred. Because that is something, because Spielberg is the greatest, I think, or certainly the greatest modern storyteller, but at some level has been often, considered to be, because he could do that, someone who is not true art. In fact, he was asked, I read this today, he was asked in 1990 when he did it with 60 Minutes about Spielberg, how he felt about the fact that because he is a great mass, cinema maker, that some people would not consider his movies to be great art. And I think that's such a strange question at some level.
I mean, I think lots of people do consider him to be a great artist now. I mean, I think it's a slight sort of Aunt Sally to set up, on the one hand.
But not at the time. Not in 1986.
No, not at the time. I think my feeling is that I didn't go to him to sneer at all. I mean, I was really looking forward to it in a way. But certainly, you did tolerate people like Peter Greenaway, who I think now is an impossibly attenuated filmmaker, impossibly difficult. An interesting man. I'm not going to go the other way and start knocking him too much. He's an interesting man, and he's with interesting ideas. But certainly, when we sat down to watch E.T., and I realized then what I think now is how very rare it is to hear, even in romantic films, people say the words, "I love you." And I don't think the words have ever been said with such devastating power as in E.T. Certainly, I'd never heard it before. I'd never heard it before. And also, I think I picked it up on the Christian analogy, which was applied retrospectively to E.T., either facetiously or not, but it certainly was.
But someone said that to me, someone tweeted me, John O'Farrell, the writer, he
I
tweeted me when I put out a tweet about this, saying something along the lines of, E.T. comes down from the sky, he dies, he rises again, and people fall in love with him and people's lives are transformed, the New Testament writers should sue. And I thought, well, that's true enough, but really what I think is I very much doubt that Spielberg was trying to retell that story. What I think he was doing was telling an immensely powerful mythic story, of which the New Testament is another one. And so these myths, they follow to some extent similar patterns because they create the same immense emotional response.
Yes, I mean, I don't find it as coercive or manipulative in a way as, say, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or these things which are often held to be kind of Christian or Christian.
I thought you were going to say you don't find it as emotionally coercive as the New Testament.
I think it's better. One thing is, I think it's better than the New Testament in the sense that, as a piece of storytelling, we don't get to see Jesus rise again. Nobody sees it. It's slightly unsatisfying.
Yeah.
Whereas Steven Spielberg obviously thought, that's not bad, but here's how we're going to improve it.
Yeah. Yeah, and there aren't sort of weird bits like the marriage at Cana, which doesn't really fit in and stuff like that.
All those things are four separate narratives.
Yeah,
it doesn't work.
No, I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. Goodness. So I don't remember. I remember you being very quiet.
No, I was very, very moved.
I remember you very quiet, but I don't remember you articulating.
I then became obsessed, and this is.
I don't remember you articulating your emotions in the way I think you would now.
Oh, right. So I didn't say to you. I didn't talk about how I felt.
No,
that's unusual for me. It is really unusual for me. Maybe I was just so affected by it because also I remember writing about this in Sight and Sound sometime later. I then became obsessed with the idea of trying to find films that could make me cry because it's a particular type of crying as well that you get in the cinema. It's incredibly brilliant crying, isn't it? Because it's not like crying when something really bad happens to you, or indeed crying at some awful thing on the news where you just feel terrible. It's a kind of great relinquishment of responsibility, crying in the cinema, because it's crying at something that is constructed for you that you have no responsibility for. And I came up with a list of films, I think, that did make me cry, of which E.T. is still the number one, but I put on it, I think, Edward Scissorhands was number two. Edward Scissorhands, particularly the bit at the end. I went to see that with, I was friendly with Dennis Leary. I don't know if you know him, the American comedian who's a really, really tough man's man. And I went to see Edward Scissorhands with him, and there's a bit at the end where you realise that Winona Ryder is telling the whole story of Edward Scissorhands to her granddaughter. She's an old woman now. Yes. And the old woman says, because Edward Scissorhands only really appears when it snows, she says, the granddaughter says, "Does it ever snow now?" And she goes, "Yes, it does. Sometimes you can still see me dancing in it." And I wept and wept and wept. And then afterwards, Dennis Leary said, "Well, yeah, I enjoyed that, but that was such a shit sentimental line, wasn't it? That one, I had to pretend there was something in my eye, and that I hadn't been at all affected by it." Because, clearly I am still only now able to express these things.
I mean, having to say it makes me choke up.
No, it does make me.
For me, I think I get choked up at The Cruel Sea with Jack Hawkins, which is a very where he's.
That's so you. I have to say.
Yeah, well, it's very you. What you're saying is that I love the Jack Hawkins seeing the chaps in the water and realizing he can't save them. And eventually saying, "It's the war, number one. It's the bloody war." I love it. It's absolutely fantastic. I'm laughing now.
No.
I'm laughing now, obviously. I'm cool about it now.
The way you did it wouldn't have got any kind of crying, I have to say.
I feel sad, though, the way I did it. I'm making myself
Now, hang on, I want to go through my list, just to see if anyone else has got any other big crying films. Then Ghost was number 3. And I saw Ghost on my own, actually not at the cinema, on VHS. I was on my own, and I cried so much I started to laugh, I remember. And I think Ghost is a brilliant film, by the way. I thought about Ghost for this too, because I remember, I think you have to have some kind of energy to want to promote a film as and I think the thing with E.T., although you're right, it's a bit of an Aunt Sally now, it was so much about getting over this hump of it's not a great work of art. I think with Ghost, I remember at the time Truly, Madly, Deeply had come out at the same time, and all critics were saying this is a much, much better film. And you watch them now and you think, no, that's essentially, it's a good film, but it's essentially a smaller, much more British, slightly Radio 4-ish drama compared to Ghost, which is kind of extraordinary and big and tells that kind of mythic storytelling that I'm talking about. And then a strange one is Play It Again, Sam actually does also make me cry. There's a bit at the end of Play It Again, Sam, which is the funniest film I've ever seen. But there's a bit at the end of Play It Again, Sam, again, interesting from a cinema point of view, where you may know that in Play It Again, Sam, Woody Allen's character watches compulsively Casablanca. And then Humphrey Bogart kind of enters his life to try and help him with his love life. And then right at the end of it, Diane Keaton is leaving at the airport. And Woody Allen says something, and you think, I've heard that somewhere. And it's a beautiful sentence. And Diane Keaton says, "That's beautiful." And Woody Allen says, "It's from Casablanca. I waited my whole life to say it." And it's choking me up, as I'm telling you now. And it's really, really beautiful, because you don't notice that he slipped it in, and it's got real kind of emotional impact. So those were my 5 crying films. And I don't know, actually, since because I became very obsessed with wanting to find films that would make me cry. And then I became slightly less obsessed with it. I sort of felt like I got all cried out after a while.
Yeah, I think the very powerful thing about E.T. it's not a weepy. It's the whole point of it isn't that you're crying. It's not like Beaches or something like that. That's why that final the speech, that Henry Thomas's speech, is so powerful.
Yeah, but Beach is an interesting thing.
Well, what I think is fascinating is performances like Drew Barrymore, which is, I think, another interesting thing about E.T. is one of the great child acting performances by her. She doesn't look like she's acting. There's wonderful speeches which just are devastatingly real and disturbed, where she starts saying "the man in the moon" over and over again.
Well, there's an interesting bit with her,
wonderful.
That's a very good point about E.T. is not a weepy. Its use of sentimentality is incredibly economical, and there's a bit, for example, which is very hyper-aware of that, where Elliot, when he's trying to tell, what's her name, the Drew Barrymore character, well, he's trying to tell her, Gertie, he's trying to tell her not to tell their mum about E.T. being in his cupboard. He says, "Oh, grown-ups can't see him." And she says, "Yeah, give me a break," right? Because she knows that's rubbish, and that's because a more fairy tale film would have gone along with that. And what there is in E.T. is an incredible economy of sentimentality, so that when at the end, Elliot says, I don't want to spoil it almost, but when he says, don't spoil it. I want to talk about the thing that really, really makes me cry, but that's at the end.
That's at the end.
Don't spoil it. Okay, well, can I say that's Frank Skinner heckling, ladies and gentlemen? And I feel cowed, to be honest. So, all right, I won't spoil it. But, well, you know what it is. Those of you who've seen E.T., there's... No, I'm not going to say it. All right. I'm not going to say it. I don't know what to say
It's
now,
become,
though.
well...
We're not allowed to talk about the
No, we're not allowed to. Now you know,
Yeah.
welcome to my world.
Yeah.